Hello, everyone. We're here today to discuss not only the beginnings of life, but abortion and in vitro fertilization and how they're connected to each other. And we just saw this clip of ectolife to show the extreme consequences of where, in vitro fertilization and this sort of technology is going to bring us. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, let's say, in vitro fertilization began in 1977, about 50 years ago, it began in vitro fertilization. But it wasn't commonplace. People couldn't possibly imagine it becoming so common as today. And, and they were probably laughing about it. And when I showed this video to my class, the students also found it rather humorous. And I mentioned to them, that 30, 40, 50 years from now, it's going to be commonplace because this is what we know as the Overton window. One thing leads to another unless we follow given principles. So one of the principles to be followed in reproductive health is the principle of Humanae Vitae 12, that sex is made with two ends in mind, the procreative and the unitive end, which is also obviously what the church has been teaching for centuries and what was also taught in Castico Nubi, that these two ends need to be remembered. So the contraception contraception denies the first end, the procreative end. It blocks the sexual act from coming to its conclusion. And IVF impedes the second end, the unitive end. And so when you meddle with this natural process, the consequences can be what we saw just now. And you can laugh about it, you can think it's a bit crazy, but it's not, because this is what usually ends up happening. And little by little, people become accustomed to things. And so from IVF, from the desire to have a baby at all costs, which seems like such a good desire, and not realizing that a baby nonetheless is a gift from God, but wanting to have that baby at all costs, we end up commoditizing the baby. We end up using money to purchase almost a baby. It becomes a commodity. It becomes a product. And this is what the church has been, against with this IVF for quite some time. Apart from that, IVF has other consequences that are palpable. Sometimes, I've had students of mine who are said that they were born, or their cousins or their brothers or someone was born of IVF. Family members were born of IVF, which is more commonplace now. And it's not that they themselves become a problem. Their soul is the soul. So when we discuss the beginnings of life, we discuss the beginnings of life begin at conception. And if that's the case, then IVF, which produces other embryos, does with those embryos things that we all know. Many embryos end up in freezers or thrown away. I don't know. It's not what is dignified of a human to be treating embryos, human beings, in that way. So with this in mind, given that there's not only a theology behind this, but a philosophy and a philosophy of the dignity of the human person, and creating the image of God, I here ask Vito to explain some other philosophical roots of this. So Vito, welcome again.
Thank you, Father Francesco. It's always so good to have you, to have talks with you and podcasts. So, I would like to introduce you some cultural and philosophical like ideas that are leading us to the problems like AVF. So the root, philosophical root, has today. We must know that today we live in a fluid world. Yeah, very complex from cultural and from cultural point of view, where there is no ethical uniformity, and there is no theological uniformity, and there is no uniformity of faith. And so we have a strong dose of atheism. So in the atheistic perspective, one can refer to that what Feuerbach said, homo homini deus est. And according to which God is no longer the center of existence, but man. Because basically he idolizes himself, put himself in the place of divinity. And God, the creator, is replaced by the man creator, who creates his own destiny. Mm-hmm. And we can certainly apply it to in vitro fertilization. Mm-hmm. But this is not everything. We also live in a secularized vision, you know, where religion and faith and politics, the church and politics are separated, and so religion has no longer any excuses. And thanks to the telescope and microscope, the faith no longer provides any explanation, any importance. And like Christopher Hitchens said, God is not great. Religion is put aside. Like the theological problems, religious problems are no longer relevant to the decidability of social, ethical, and relational questions. Because the secularization that has been set aside for us was put aside theological reality. Mm-hmm. Everything is explained by science. Mm-hmm. And also, it's very related to if there is atheism, if there is no God, then who is God? It's me, it's homo, it's... so we are basically... It links to the individualism. Mm-hmm. So it's another route that can be connected to in vitro fertilization. Mm-hmm. Why? Because in individualistic perspective, as Spencer explains, like this, in the past, the function of liberalism was to put a limit on the power of kings. In the future, the function of true liberalism will be to put a limit on the powers of parliaments. So basically, man against the state, individual is the one who has freed himself from social bonds, from the church, from the state, from the society. And no one can tell me what to do, neither the church, neither the state. Mm-hmm. And then the freedom is understood as absolute freedom. I can do what I ever want. Mm-hmm. But it necessarily leads us to the utilitarianism, where basically the reality is not for the good itself, but for the maximization of the profit that each of us can obtain. Okay?
Yes.
And the scientism there is also the scientism, where science is no longer one of many keys to understanding reality. Together with ethics, with theology, together with philosophy, but becomes the only and exclusive interpretation of reality. So that is the scientism. So what is scientifically possible becomes ethically also just, ethically right. And technicality. Everything that is technically possible in itself is understood by the contemporary world as ethically and legally licit. And I would also like to point out that we have a widespread vision of relativism. So everything is interconnected. So atheism leads to secularism, the secularism to individualism, individualism to utilitarianism and scientism, but to the relativism, because so according to relativism, good and evil are now very questionable, because we no longer know what is good and what is evil. So this vision arrives to the nihilistic vision, because we put God aside, and it is, for example, also if we speak about relativism, we have also two legal point of views that have opposition to each other. So from one point there is anti-Judaism. It means intolerance towards rules, okay? And from the other hand, hyper-Judaism, where the law and the rights can satisfy all our desires. And for example, and this is where we enter in the bioethical fields of procreation. For example, if I want to become a parent, well, technology and the science allow me to do so, for example, through the assisted procreation and in vitro fertilization. But the state, for example, doesn't have any rule on that. Then the state must approve to me the law that allows me to become a parent. And also vice versa, if I don't want to become a parent, well then the state must guarantee my right to abortion. And this is where we see these ideas. And why is that? Because there is no true. And when there is no true, everything is possible. We can decide for ourselves what we want to do. And without God, there remains only the will of power. And that will of power is forced by technology, which I can exercise, where I can actualize my will of power with technology. And
where the knowledge is power, that expression. Now,
what's very interesting, as we said, the philosophical background and cultural background is totally atheistic. Atheism in the institutes, nihilism, relativism, scientism, and so on. But in another hand, we can say that the concept of fertilization is today very close to religion itself. Because the salvation of suffering is lost through technological power. First, in the history, money was invested in the building of the churches, and the only savior was Jesus Christ. But now, in our days, when God died, the solution of all problems is in our hands. So we basically passed from Homo sapiens to Homo technologicus.
Yes,
Homo
exactly.
transhumanus.
Yes.
And so it's my God of salvation becomes the technological power that saves me from suffering of not being able to have children on the one hand, and on the other hand, technology makes it possible for me to actualize even the desire not to have children. And so I found the solution not in divine will, but in technology and instant solutions. And but as you said, the first in vitro fertilization happened in
77.
78. Yeah.
78? Oh, 78, okay.
78, yeah. Yeah, so I think that would be a philosophical, cultural background, and we
No,
have
it's very important, very useful, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, because it's essentially what's happening is that man wants to become God. Essentially, man thinks he is God. That there is no God. That he is God. I mean, Feuerbach talks about the projection of God. Like, basically, what we believe is God is a projection of ourselves. God is a projection of ourselves. Excuse me, not the projection of God, but the God that we created God, essentially, according to this vision. And this is, Feuerbach is obviously the thinker behind Marx, and Marx applies his thinking practically speaking. And so we live in a society with a praxis of these theories. And so what we're talking about here is that IVF is a praxis of a theory connected to an anthropology that looks at man centralizes man. But ironically, by centralizing man, you destroy man. Because what's happening is you're destroying the very nature of man. You're destroying the very nature of sex. You're destroying the very nature of what man has become,
and of the family.
And of course, because that's the nature of man, is in the family. And so you create, that shocking picture that we saw at the beginning of the video with the Ectolife. You see these babies that are like in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. You see these babies in incubators, with selections, heavily selected. This is already happening, not in incubators, but it's already happening that people are buying children the way they want them, with a certain color eyes, with certain traits that they want. They designer babies, they're called. So this is already happening. And I mean, the key excuse people use is that they're infertile, that they're not fertile, and then what they don't realize oftentimes is that infertility is based on contraception. Women become infertile because of contraception. So it's just trying to do everything on our own terms. It's what you said about freedom. It's an absolute freedom. It's absolutely deciding everything on our own terms. And these are the consequences of these ideas. So women are also having children later. They're contracepting. They're having children later. So obviously they become infertile. It's a fertility problem in general, and so we might as well just move to these kinds of methods to resolve that. And then what's even more interesting about all this is that IVF is then passed on as a pro-life issue. Like it's like pro-life, it's against abortion. But people don't realize that you're killing the embryos. So it's not a pro-life issue really, and that's what's being passed right now in America too, with the IVF laws and all this to have more children.
Father,
Yes.
speaking of contraception and maybe about Rule 486 abortion.
486, yeah.
Are you? Yeah.
The morning after pill, yes.
There is a contraposition between. So they everybody do the emphasis on the right of liberty and the
Yes.
privacy.
Yes.
Like, okay, he will. The pharmacy and the medic doctor will give you that contraception or pill
Abortion pill.
based on the right of liberty. But where is the right of information to know the true side effects?
Yes.
Why is nobody talking about that? That's very, very sad.
Well, they might talk about it in the fine print, in the small print.
Nobody.
But they don't tell you. They're not supposed to tell you. Over the counter. Yeah. Oh, you're right. We live in a world full of contradictions, and this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the results of all this. So.
Of course. And I would like to point out some psychological concerns of in vitro fertilization. Mm-hmm. We have, of course, the problem of the child's identity. Who am I? Who is my dad? Just come si dice goccia?
Is it just a godchild? What do you mean?
È soltanto se, cioè potrebbe pensare che
è un padrino. It could be a godfather. I don't know.
No.
I don't understand.
No, it's just so. Basically, the child psychological problem could be asking himself, "Oh my God, is my dad just a drop of the sperm in vitro?"
Yeah.
That's and
this is a very true problem. I mean, this is a very good problem because the true issue that you're bringing up, because there's these cases of these men that go to a sperm bank.
Yeah.
And they have, I've seen this article recently. I saw an article headline: "A man who fathered 700 and something children celebrates Christmas alone."
Oh.
Well, because he just fathered them at a sperm bank.
Yeah.
He's just seen as an instrument, a technological instrument. As you're saying, everything today is about the efficient causality. Nothing's about there's no final, formal, and material cause. It's all efficient causality. If we can do it, do it. Francis Bacon idea of, where there's knowledge is power. As long as we can do it, as long as we have the technology and the knowledge and the technology to do it, we do it.
Sure.
That's what you're talking about. But then that dehumanizes everything, because then you see a title like this, a man that has 700 and something children, but is spending Christmas alone, and there's a photo of him on a beach all alone. Mm-hmm. And so this also gets to the point what you were talking about, the atomization of man, and you mentioned that the atomization of man. This atomization of man is essentially what C.S. Lewis talks about in The Great Divorce. In The Great Divorce, where is the atomization of man? In hell.
In hell, yeah. Sure.
The loneliness, not the solitude, because solitude can be a spiritual solitude with Christ. It's very good. That's not atomization. That's the monos, not the monad, right? And this sort of detachment of the unitive sense of sex and the procreative sense of sex, it brings to this. It brings to this sort of solitude. It's actually, it just really doesn't seem from God.
No, of course.
It seems like, you see the consequences, it leaves people very alone in these
Sure.
extreme consequences I'm talking about, in extreme cases like this man that goes to a sperm bank. I mean, it's not a really edifying human way of living.
Of course. Of course.
I know that it's an extreme case, but people do need to think about extreme cases. As you said, they need to be reading. They need to be given some instruction on this. They need to be told what this is about, and but more than just the medical instruction, I think they need to also be told what the other consequences are, the psychological consequences are, what you're talking about, and there's the psychological consequence, for example, that's very common today. About the post-abortive depression in women and in men. All these sort of things that come up with these sorts of problems, with abortion, for instance, which is all connected. These things are all connected, all these themes. But there's a lot of consequences connected to this that people don't talk about oftentimes, and this is one of them. The solitude, the loneliness is one of the psychological problems that are connected to this sort of society. So I guess what we can do is we can go on to talking about how this sort of mentality is connected to the abortion mentality. And we have to see with that, like how we can connect abortion itself to a type of eugenics, a type of control of the kinds of people that you want in our society. So to call abortion the new eugenics, it's a strong statement, I know, but it's sort of controlled also by the idea of what Vito has been talking about, this sort of control, and it's connected to that. So, the typical arguments that abortionists make, for abortion is that, there's the fatal birth defects, there's rape and incest, there's women dying of illegal abortions, there's mother's health, there's the free choice, there's the body of the mother. These are all things that usually come up. And, when we talk about the fatal birth defects, for example, the unborn child, we have to remember that the unborn child is nonetheless a human being, regardless of his or her physical or mental condition. It's not, and this is what goes back to the whole thing with in vitro. What we're talking about is that we're talking about a human being with a person with a dignity, and having a handicap in this case does not make a human being any less human. In the eyes of God, all of us are equal in this regard, because of all of our humanity and our dignity is connected to the same roots, being a son or daughter of God. It's infinitely more humane for a child to die in the loving hands of his or her parents than by the knife of the abortionists. Also, we have to think about, So if you have these sorts of defects, like I've had situations that I know where a woman. There was a young lady that was having trouble with her pregnancy, and she carried it through, and the child died at the end. And then we had a funeral for the child. We weren't able to baptize, but we were able to do a funeral with the permission of the bishop. But that made me understand also, the difference between the child dying in the loving hands of his parents and by the knife of the abortionist, and then the openness to life that the woman showed, in not having an abortion as well, insisting not against it because doctors are trying to make her have one. I mean, that could have also damaged her reproductive organs, or we never know. There's kinds of secondary consequences of abortion, and then she would not have been able to have any more children. Instead, she was able to have more children, and I baptized them. So, it's just there's a sense in all of this about following nature, following what God provides us, the gifts that He gives us, sometimes children with the greatest defects become the children that teach us the most. So, abortion for birth defects or eugenics in this sense can never be justified because it's become a type of eugenics, a type of control, as Vito is talking about. I mean, abortion does not unrape a woman or take away the trauma of incest. It merely heaps one atrocity on top of another. We have to keep this in mind. If we considered two babies laid side by side, could anyone identify the one that was conceived by rape or by incest after all? You know, we have to keep that in mind. Then why select one baby for extinction based solely upon the circumstances of her conception? There's lots of beautiful cases like this of, you know, mothers who went ahead and had the child, and the child becomes like, you know, a basketball star or something like that. So, you know, there are many examples that help us understand that, you know, having an abortion just because of rape or incest, it's not necessarily is not the right thing to do. One added wrong does not make the other wrong less wrong. You know, it just creates more wrongs. And I understand that it's really traumatic. I mean, I can imagine being raped and having the child. I can only imagine. I couldn't possibly. Actually, I should say I could possibly imagine. You know, what it would be like. And it is a traumatic experience, but maybe that child then becomes a blessing for you, even out of that trauma, which is what we have seen in some of these other cases where women have actually gone on. Then the next point is the women dying of illegal abortions. These are all these different excuses. This is the number one tactic pro-abortionists have used to legalize abortion in many countries around the world. They always hugely exaggerate the numbers of women who are being killed and mutilated by illegal abortions. For example, the ex-abortionist turned pro-life Dr. Bernard Nathanson confessed that he and the abortion movement invented the stat of 5 to 10,000 maternal deaths due to illegal abortions, when the actual statistic was 65 maternal deaths per year in 1972, excuse me. So it was actually 65, not 5 to 10,000. So, you know, we have to be aware of these things as well. If the pro-abortionists are so concerned about the health of the woman, why do they not simply call for enforcement of the existing laws and the arrest of illegal abortionists? If that's the case. That's the other question that one asks oneself. Then one other point is, you know, the mother's health is always a concern. The Catholic Church bans direct abortion to save the life of the mother. However, the mother's life may be saved by a surgical procedure that does not directly attack the preborn baby's life. This is what's called the principle of secondary effect. Of double effect, the principle of double effect, which states that it is morally allowable to perform an action that will produce both the good and the bad effects as long as the following 5 conditions are met. This is very important to keep this in mind. That the object of the action to be performed must be good in itself, or at least morally neutral. The good effect must not come about as a result of the evil effect, but must come directly from the action itself. The evil effect must not be desired in itself, but only permitted. And there must be a sufficiently grave reason for permitting the evil effects to occur. Sometimes a 5th condition is added, implicit in number 4, which is that there be a sufficiently grave reason for permitting the evil to occur, that there is no other alternative available to solve the problem at hand. So, you know, this usually has to deal with these ectopic pregnancies, or, you know, the child doesn't, the baby doesn't come, the embryo doesn't come into the uterus, or it's just there, you know, and what do you do in those situations? So the key is that the direct a direct operation that one is trying to do is not meant to be an abortion, but it can be to save the mother's life in a very awkward situation, in a very not awkward but a very bad situation. Modern medicine and pro-life OBGYN physicians have the knowledge of the procedures and the treatments that allow, in effect, both the mother and the child to be saved in case of high-risk pregnancies. That's the other thing, we have a very good technology now that, should be used for this higher end. And can be used and should be used for a higher end. And so what Vito talked about also with freedom in all of this is the free choice, the choice. What does that mean? And we know that freedom doesn't mean just do whatever you want, but rather it means being able to search for the truth. That's the truth. That is truly freedom. Freedom is to be able to search for the truth, which brings you a peace. Truth brings one peace. Without a reminder of truth and the natural moral law, freedom falls into arbitrariness. And that's what we see. So it's one person's freedom against another person's freedom. And then what Vito was saying, then it becomes a question of power. Who overpowers who? That's whose freedom is then made evident. Only that person's freedom. So in the end, no freedom is absolute. All freedoms have limits on them. Unlimited personal freedom eventually means spiritual slavery, a total disregard for the welfare of others. And we have to realize in all of this that it's all bound by truth. So some choices simply are wrong. And abortion is a wrong and evil choice because it destroys an innocent human life. It all boils down to that. This excuse that they use, the body of the mother, this expression. The baby is inside the mother's body, but this is no more makes it a part of her body than being inside a car makes one a part of a car. Now, there was this philosopher, this feminist philosopher from the 1970s who said, imagine that she has to be attached to a comatose person for 9 months to give that person life. And she just has to be attached to that person. And this is, there's in her argument, there's a certain truth to that, but it's not a full truth. Because, the one who made the choice to have sex is her. So it's not the same thing as just being forcefully attached to some comatose patient, right? For 9 months without, who you have nothing in common with or you've done nothing with. No, you've done something to have that pregnancy, to have that baby in you. And who is attached to you like a comatose patient would be, and that's true, but you have done something for that. You have decided to have sex, And in order to highlight the fact, we have to remember that in order to highlight the fact that the baby is a separate being, we have to consider this, that every cell in the mother's body has a set of chromosomal characteristics that is entirely distinct from every cell in the baby's body. The mother and the baby also have frequently different blood types. They can also be different race. And the baby can die without the mother dying. The mother can die without the baby dying. So it's not just another organ. It's not the body of the mother, in other words. It's very clear that argument doesn't work. My body, my choice, and all this. It's not true. It's not your body, your choice. You have made a choice to go and get involved in sexual relations, and then these are the consequences of it, and you have to have a child. The perennial debate about abortion, essentially, the Christian view teaches us that the human dignity is not based on social status, on intelligence, special merits. Belonging to humanity is the essential is the essential point of our human dignity. We are one family which has a special relationship with God, which is humanity, having created the human person in his image and likeness. And human beings must be respected for who they are in themselves. And children, indeed, in this sense, are a gift from God. And so that we need to go back to thinking about how, we're dependent and we need God and we need others, and that we are essentially not entirely free to do whatever we want. John Paul II in Eugenics Vitae 67 says, "I declare the direct abortion, that is, abortion willed as an end or as a means, always constitutes a grave moral disorder. So it is the deliberate killing of an innocent human being. This doctrine is based upon the natural law and upon the written word of God, transmitted by the Church's tradition and taught by the ordinary universal magisterium. No circumstance, no purpose, no law whatsoever can ever make licit an act which is intrinsically illicit, since it is contrary to the law of God, which is written in every human heart, knowable by reason itself and proclaimed by the Church." So, as we know also, there's so many abortions in the world right now. I mean, we had the statistics earlier this year, 45 million babies. 45 million babies across the world were killed. You see, this is what makes you really, should make you think. And it's very hidden. We think about the Holocaust, we think about the Katan massacre, we think about lots of massacres throughout the wars, but none of them have had so many babies killed, so many human beings killed as we have with abortion. So this should really make us think about things. So in this sense, we can say, in a sense, it is like a new eugenics. Prenatal diagnosis, in this sense. Also, here we go into what we were talking about earlier with IVF and now selective reproduction. It's connected to the dangers of prenatal diagnosis. However, Evangelium Vitae 14 says the prenatal diagnosis presents no moral objections if carried out in order to identify medical treatment which may be needed by the child in the womb. All too often becomes an opportunity for proposing and procuring an abortion. So this is the eugenic abortion, justified in public opinion on the basis of a mentality which accepts life only under certain conditions and rejects it when it's affected by any limitation, handicap, or illness. And this is where we get the selective breeding. This is where we get with everything that Vita was talking about earlier. This is where we get to IVF, and this is where we get eventually to the ectolife. This is what this is going to bring to if these principles are not being observed. Prenatal testing is a search and can it be understood as a search and destroy mission? Many medics and genetic counselors report that abortion is the consequence of a test that has shown a defect. The question that is never asked is who decides the genetic characteristics that justify killing, on what basis, and in what is whose interest. Also, here comes the famous important issue of the quality of life. Oftentimes, quality of life is the reason people give for anything. Anything goes with a quality of life issue. So the new eugenics through prenatal testing and abortion is based essentially on an indefensible conception of the relationship between parents and children and a philosophically insane claim that one person is more important than another's. Some countries boast of having eliminated children with Down syndrome by aborting 90% of children suspected of having this genetic defect. I think it was in Greenland that this happened. No more Down syndrome children because they'd aborted all of them. This is very, very dramatic. And one can ask, like with the South African philosopher, I forgot his name right now. He talks about, is it better off to be dead? And is it better to be? Is it not better never to have been given a life? Obviously, it's better to be given a life. It's better to be dead. My response to that is better to be alive in hell than to be dead, and than not to be have ever been created. I mean, that's the Augustinian response. It's better to be than not to be. And so, on this, in this sort of mentality, you have this false mercy for justifying euthanasia. Also, so all these things are connected. And I think that that's what we're trying to do with this in this talk right here, is just to show how these parts are connected, all of them.
Euthanasia in the near future is going to be considered normal, even by some theologians. And he really gave some prophetic words, because even some theologians say that my life is, God gave me a life, and then if God gave me a life, I'm the absolute
measure
measure of my life. The life is in my hands. And yeah, that's just little thing that I wanted to.
No, it's good.
To say.
Thank you, Thank you, Vito. Thank you. Very good. Well, thank you for this episode on eugenics and abortion and the philosophical underpinnings of IVF, etc. All these connections that are there. There's kind of a lot to be digested. But one of the things that I keep thinking about all the time is that philosophy is behind so much of what we do and what we are and what our society is. And just, I think ignorance of philosophy is ignorance of what we're living through. So the more you study the philosophers and put them in their proper context, the more you'll understand what we're going through today. It's all based on philosophy, and philosophy that nobody's read except for a few, that then implement those philosophies into life. So, but thank you again, Vito. Thank you.
Thank you.